Hi there everyone, and welcome back to this video series on trusting the process. Now, in the first video in this series, I discussed the importance of understanding what trusting the process isn't. And we also talked about how to identify when it's time to move on from something that you're doing. In this video, we're going to talk about what trusting the process is and how we identify what we're going to. And it's a great time for me to bring up the topic of fear. Now, why fear? Well, because anytime we go from something known to something unknown, there is likely going to be fear. Even if that known quantity of what you're doing is ineffective, you're used to it. It's comfortable. It's a comfortable part of what you do. And to go to something that's completely new and different and uncomfortable naturally leads us to have a certain amount of fear. Now, fear in itself is not a bad thing. Through life, it's designed to keep us safe from harm. And in that capacity, it's useful. But in brass playing, it's really, at best, fear is unhelpful. And at worst, it can be completely debilitating. And that means we need to have strategies to deal with it. And the strategy I want to focus on today is that of trust. Now, consider the case of a skydiver. When someone is getting ready to jump out of an airplane, of course there's fear. But what gets them to actually take the plunge to jump out? The trust. The trust that their parachute will open. Consider a firefighter. What gets someone to go into a burning building to either put out a fire or to rescue people? Trust in their equipment and in their training. Now, brass playing isn't nearly as heroic and dangerous as running into a burning building, nor is it as harrowing as jumping out of an airplane, but it has its own brand of fear. And that's what we're going to combat. And how do we gain that trust? Because that's how we combat it. When we trust that what we're going to do is going to work, that gives us the antidote to fear. But how do we get that trust? Through understanding. And that understanding is key. And I'm going to go back to the illustration that I gave in the last video about my work in my senior year. Now, throughout my senior year in high school, my teacher, Mr. Alessi, had talked about the importance of the chin muscles and the role that they play. At times he said that the chin muscles serve to really be the foundation for our upper register. And at other times he may have mentioned that they're the anchor by which we can really get into the upper register. And that was really important. It was important for me to hear because I played with an embouchure that did not use those muscles at all. I played with what he would describe, and I would describe as a modified smile, that my corners came up, but I had no engagement to the chin. And this starts to become really important because as I end my senior year in high school, of course, I didn't consider any changes, and he didn't encourage me to make any substantial changes because I had college auditions to prepare for. But once my senior year was done, and I knew I was committed to going to Juilliard, I knew, based on our conversations, that it was likely, almost certainly, at some point I was going to make a change in my embouchure. And I had to decide, did I want to wait until I started school to do that? And in my mind I said, no, I do not. I don't want to waste time at school making an embouchure change, especially one that I can make during the summertime. Now, how could I make it? If we go back to the things that I talked about in the last video. 1, what did I hope to do? I hope to improve my upper register, really simply. 2, how was I going to do that? By learning to engage these muscles. And with the understanding that I had from Mr. Alessi that engaging these muscles would provide me the foundation, the anchoring that I needed to play in the upper register, I could undertake that work in earnest and without fear. Or, if I had fear, I had that antidote of trust to be able to combat it. And boy, am I glad I had that antidote, because it took me about a week to learn how to play, engaging these muscles. But once I did, my upper register, which in my senior year had been sort of a plateau, it plummeted. I nosedived. And the best I could play was an F above the staff. And within 2 weeks, I not only could keep my chin engaged, that's the only way I knew how to play. I had forgotten how I made my old embouchure, and all I had was the new one. And meanwhile, my upper register had tanked. But I knew I was ready for that regression because I understood If these muscles are the foundation for my upper register and I haven't been using them, of course when I start to use them, my upper register is going to be weak. Of course I'm going to lose something. Of course I'm going to go backwards. But I can go backwards knowing that I'm going to be doing something that in the long term will benefit me. And so, as I said, in 2 weeks I couldn't make my old embouchure anymore. It probably took me about 3 months to get to the point. Since I started the work in middle of July, it was probably by about the end of September to the beginning of October that I could play through an early Bordoni and make it through. And I remember exactly which one it was. I remember it was the, I think it was number 11, which is and I made it all the way through. And I remember Joe was so happy. He said, "Yeah, man, I'm so glad you undertook this." And I was so glad I undertook it. But it took probably until 6 months after the change for me to really feel I'd gotten back to where I had been. And I saw myself go, and I saw myself get to that point at 6 months, at that plateau where I had been. And then my growth just continued. And it kept growing. And within 9 months, I was hitting notes that I didn't know that I'd be able to hit, and that I had tried for a year to do unsuccessfully, because I was able to make the change. Trust comes from understanding. And that means that we need to do everything we can to understand as much about playing as we can. When we understand how things work, we can then come up with our own plan for how to work around it. A complementary set of exercises that works within that system. It's not rocket science, it's understanding. And when we have the understanding of how things work, we come up with what's going to be complementary with it, and then we can trust that even if it doesn't work out exactly the way we want to, we are going to be in a good spot. That is going to be a constructive way to work. Now, this brings up the topic, the question of, what about paralysis through analysis? Because some of you, I'm sure, are going to be watching this saying, well, that's all well and good, but what about overthinking and the dangers of overthinking? Come back next week for the third video in this series, the final video, which is specifically on this topic, which I'm going to give you a little preview. 1, I believe it completely that it exists, and 2, I also believe it is very much misunderstood. Come back.